For those of you who have been subscribed to me long enough know that I've done responses in the past on Libertarian Socialist Rants, and as I've argued many times before, Libertarian Socialism is an oxymoron, cannot strip an individual of their rights to owning their own property, their liberty. If you infringe upon the individual's rights and liberty, naturally that requires dictatorship. In this particular argument by Libertarian Socialist Rants, he argues on communal ownership. Now, it's important for you to understand that when it comes across to arguing with socialists, they speak purely from the basis of theory. Forget practice, forget the real world. They want you to acknowledge socialism from what's stuck in their head, basically.
David Pachman claims that collectivization, or common ownership of the means of production, is authoritarian.
If you enforce that the means of production must be owned in common, that is an authoritarian action to take. And I don't believe, or at least I've not seen any evidence, although I'm willing to have my mind changed, that you will end up with an egalitarian, self-determining society if you impose it in an authoritarian way.
First of all, I can't believe I'm actually agreeing with David Pachman on something. I think the only slight thing that I disagree with him on is that he says in an authoritarian way. Well, at the end of the day, there is no other way. In order to reach that position of communal ownership, you have to abolish and, subordinate all individual liberty and all individual rights. They try to take socialism with that of communal ownership, which is to do with collectivization, collective ownership of the means of production, and then they somehow do a loop-the-loop and they reach this position of trying to fit in personal ownership of possessions with that to do with collective ownership. It's that pathetic, folk. I have to actually dig up the dictionary definition in idiot's language to point out what the definition of personal means. Personal basically pertains to the individual. It's something to do with someone's private life. We acknowledge the fact that there are movable property and immovable property. It doesn't matter. When we speak about individual ownership, we're speaking about individualism. Now, socialism, by definition, not my opinion, it is a fact. Socialism is the rejection of individual ownership. And collective ownership has nothing to do with that of the individual. They know the fact that their own, central planning of socialism, state socialism, has failed miserably and they can no longer defend it. Socialism, if you look at the name socialism, what does it mean when you speak about socialism? When you speak about socializing property. Well, take for example farming, agriculture. When you move away from private individual ownership and you communalize farming, what are you doing? You're basically centralizing it. Well, that's what the meaning of socializing property is. When you speak about socialized medicine, that's universal healthcare. One of the biggest things that defines socialism is political centralization.
Socialism historically has traditionally stood for democratic workers' control over the means of production.
They always speak about the theory of socialism, everything to do with a theoretical ideology. The theory being, of course, of what it stood for, apparently, what he says what it stood for. But if you actually look at the dictionary definition of socialism, there's a variety of dictionary definitions, it will point to what you've seen in practice. The most common dictionary definition of socialism points to governmental ownership. When you try to get rid of the private sector, who's the one who's going to carry that out? Of course, it's the government. It's the government that nationalises. And it requires a specific type of character who's got the gall, the guts, to completely rid the economy of the private sector. It requires a dictator. Now, in their theoretical fantasy world, somehow the state will just wither away and it'll usher in their utopia. But again, it goes down to that question, if there's no government, who the hell is going to stop me from going and doing my own thing? They never answer that question, because it's all theoretical garbage. And we saw them trying to put their ideology into practice, and you saw just how infantile and uneducated these people really are. You saw it in the Chaz and the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, but again, it's all those things to do with good intentions. The good intentions mean nothing in the face of economic reality. And like I said, even if they want to call it a committee, it's still a government. One that oversees to ensure that individuals are not going and doing their own thing.
And libertarian socialists or anarchists would argue that that kind of common ownership is inherently conflictual with centralized, state-owned command economies.
Again, I can't believe I'm actually agreeing with David Pakman on something, but he's absolutely spot on, because communal ownership of property means that you're bringing it together, you're collectivizing it. Now, I can't believe that I actually have to bring up something as simplistic as this and explain something as simple as this. But sometimes when it comes to people that lack intelligence like that of Cameron, in other words, Libertarian Socialist Rants, he doesn't comprehend that from the name collectivism, that's what it means. It means centralism. When you're collectivizing property, you are centralizing property. The fact that they have reached the stage of taking collectivism and then somehow going arse end backwards and redefining it to mean decentralism, it's insanity, is what it is.
David doesn't really acknowledge when he's saying that collectivization is authoritarian, he's not acknowledging the libertarian tendency.
No, Cameron. As a photographer, I would strongly rely upon that of being freelance, and if not, working for that of a private company. In your entire ideology, it would take away my liberty and my individual rights. Now, don't even bother going down the road of trying to redefine socialism to fit in personal ownership of property with that of socialism, because it's got nothing to do with collective ownership. Personal, and again, you go back to the dictionary definition of personal. Personal is individual. Individual ownership is the opposite in the entire meaning of collective ownership. Any private company owner who runs their own private business, you want to take that away from them. You cannot then call yourself libertarian.
What libertarian socialists want is for the economy to be run by means of horizontal, free federation of workers' councils. What that means is that what to produce, how to produce it, and what to do with the products are all decided in a direct democracy of, by, and for the workers.
The problem with that is the fact that if you take Great Britain alone, for example, each and every single individual of society all have different needs and wants. Our needs and wants are vast. The needs and wants are so vast and different from one another that it's impossible to even plan for such a thing. In order for you to have that collective ownership, and say you go down that road of democratically voting, you're going to have to subordinate the individual's needs and wants. And the serious problem with that is the fact that if you plan production democratically for the collective group or whatever it may be, and you're subordinating the needs and wants of the individual, then you're faced with a serious problem, because not all food is the same. Not all housing is the same, and scarcity is reality.
The problem is that Gavin likes new while Laura likes old.
Let's take the complexity of housing as a prime example. Not everybody wants to live in the same types of housing, and not everybody wants to live in the same place. Some people prefer the countryside, as I say, and some people prefer beachfront housing. People prefer living in the city. And even then, if you break things down, there's the complexity within a city alone. It's not as simple as saying just someone just likes living in a city. You know, when people shop around for housing, a specific place that might be close by to something that they require for their work. Now, there's obviously going to be a high demand for that area, and the demand far exceeds the availability of what is there in terms of housing. If you don't have a price system, there's no way for you to ration that rationally. So because you not get prices, you're going to have to use favouritism. You're going to have to start picking out who's going to get to live in housing. Because scarcity is reality. You can't ignore scarcity. You think scarcity is just something made up. Okay then, so what about the scarcity of land of beachfront? After all, there's only so many beachfront houses you can build in the beachfront. So since there's only so many houses that you can build in the beachfront, there's only so many people that can live on the beachfront. That's called economic reality. It's called the real world. It's called scarcity. It's called something that socialists don't understand. And it's the same thing with the complexity on food. Not all food is the same. Not everybody likes the same food.
What I would like to know is, in what sense is workers' self-management authoritarian when contrasted with a capitalist or state-run system where the bulk of the population has to continually take orders from bosses or government bureaucrats?
Of course, in a capitalist system, working for a private company, you consensually agreed to apply and you went through a job interview process and you're working for the company, so obviously you're getting orders. That's not to say that you're forced to work for that private company. You could go and start up your own private business at some point. And don't go down the road of that silly, stupid, childish argument to say, oh, if you don't work for a living, you'll starve to death. I mean, Jesus Christ. I mean, that's the same for any system. How the hell do you think your food reaches the shelves to begin with? You want to know why it's authoritarian. It's authoritarian because you basically want to strip me of my individual rights and my individual liberty to being a photographer. You do. How do you not? You're going to take away my individual rights and my individual liberty to owning my own private business. And you're trying to say that that's not authoritarian. And in order for you to keep private individual ownership out of sight after you've abolished it, how do you keep it out of sight? You've no answer. You never gave me an answer back then. You still won't give me an answer now. And none of you will. Not a single libertarian socialist out there ever will. Because you're not libertarian.
Capitalism is imposed by violence. Private ownership of the means of production requires that the capitalist class of private owners use violence to protect their proprietarian system and contain the threat of workers' democracy, which is inherently conflictual with the capitalist system.
How the hell is it the use of violence if people work for a living and they accumulate the wealth by their hard work, as well, of course, through trade in the marketplace? It's by giving something to someone that they get in exchange. That free and voluntary exchange in the marketplace is called trade. That's what capitalism's about, and that's the only way that they can accumulate such wealth. I don't understand for the life of me how you drew to the logical conclusion that the free and voluntary exchange in the marketplace became violence. How is that violence? You don't even make logical sense. If anything is violence, it's you wanting to take away, forcibly, people's individual rights and liberty to owning their own private business, and you're basically sticking a gun to their head and saying you can no longer work for yourself. There's violence.
Using violence to stop working people from managing our own affairs, that is authoritarian. It is the case that if we wanted to establish a libertarian socialist system, we would be up against that violence. So, would we have to use violence to establish common ownership of the means of production? And if yes, would that be authoritarian?
What is violence is people consensually agreeing to work for a private company and then forcibly using violence to remove the private company owner of the ownership of their own private business. That's violence. Now, there's nothing stopping those individuals who consensually agreed to work for the private company to go and start up their own private business. What's stopping them? They've got their own individual rights, and we're not speaking about a corporatist system. We're speaking about a free market where competition is fierce and it's far easier to start up your own small private business. What would stop them going and starting up their own private business? There's nothing stopping them. I don't understand how, for the life of me, how you could draw to the logical conclusion of calling that violence.
I think that the expropriation of capitalists in order to transfer the ownership of the means of production from the capitalists to the workers would likely have to be carried out by violence. But that's only necessary because of the violence that they use against us.
I can't believe for the life of me that you were even born in Scotland. You're an embarrassment. You are the prime example of why the Scotland state education system solely needs to be privatised. Mind you, look who's in power today. The likes of Nicola Sturgeon and attacking our freedom of speech, so it doesn't come of any real surprise there, does it? Like I said, you have to maintain that position. So even if you get rid of private individual ownership completely, you have to maintain it. So how do you maintain it? How do you stop individuals from going and doing their own thing? You have to control them. What's the antithesis of liberty? Control. That's right. If you have to control them, how the hell is that libertarian? It's the antithesis of liberty. And I can't even believe that you were born in Scotland. This is a country that once produced so many greats, like Robert Louis Stevenson, Adam Smith, Robert Burns, and so many countless others, like David Hume, etc. And of course the quote Voltaire of France. He once quoted saying, "We look to Scotland for all our ideas of civilization." Even Sir Winston Churchill once said, "Of all the small nations of this earth, perhaps only the ancient Greeks could surpass the Scots to the contribution to mankind." And yet here we are today, because of the state education system, producing numpties like yourself. Numpties like yourself, who can't even see the authoritarianism in that.
So, is coercive expropriation of capitalists authoritarian? Well, libertarian socialists argue that the use of such force should be organised by the working class itself by means of horizontal federations of workers' councils and militias, and we choose to organise in a non-hierarchical manner precisely because we don't want to reproduce authoritarian social relations.
Yes, this is exactly what we saw in the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, where they tried the non-hierarchical structure, but when put into practice, it all fell apart and it was quickly centralising and forming its own government. You are stuck in the crowd, the same crowd of people who believed in defunding the police and thought that that was a smart idea, and yet look what happened in the likes of New York. It's no wonder why so many people are now turning away from the left. You've just admitted that you want to use violence against people who wish to just run their own private business. What violence have they carried out? Violence? You're having a laugh. I mean, even they would laugh at you. The thing that I cannot laugh at is that your type were in amongst the Antifa and Black Lives Matter movement organisations, and that's got nothing to do with black people. These are just two Marxist organisations. That's all they are. And what were they doing? They were violently, attacking and burning and looting private businesses. And they probably still are doing it to this very day. And they're basically doing it because of people with your beliefs. In other words, you're a nutcase. You don't even understand what violence is. If anything's violent, it's yourself.
We pick up on exactly the point that David raises, that you can't produce a free, egalitarian society by authoritarian means.
No, David Pachman is actually right in what he states, because at the end of the day, in order for you to try and create your egalitarian society, we're not equal. We're all different from one another. You're going to have to force everybody collectively to be the same, and that again requires control. It's the antithesis of liberty.
David doesn't acknowledge that the use of force against capitalists does not have to be organised in a hierarchical manner, nor does he acknowledge the defensive nature of that violence against a system which is fundamentally authoritarian and violent. A crucial point that David misses is that there exists the tradition of prefiguration. Prefiguration emerged out of exactly these concerns that you can't produce a free society by authoritarian means. This argument was made way back by anarchists when they split from the First International. They said that...
Yeah, again, it goes down that whole road again of what they said. They said this and they said that. They said this, that and the next thing. Who cares what they said? It's what you put into practice that matters. That's why the Paris Commune was dictatorial. Why the anarchist Catalonia was never anarchist and was, dictatorial. The very reason why you've seen the dictatorship in the Ukraine Free Territory. Every given attempt of your libertarian socialism ended in totalitarianism. Well, I think that covers enough folk. At the end of the day, libertarian socialism's an oxymoron. It's an idiotic ideology. It's completely and wholly irrational, as I said. And just everything of what he stated is just a whole load of nonsense. You can't strip an individual of their rights and liberty and then pretend that you stand for liberty. It's just an oxymoron. And that, as I say, David Pachman, wow. I had no idea that he actually had some common sense, but he certainly is more intelligent than that of Kamiya Bams, or otherwise known as Libertarian Socialist Rants or whatever. He's just utterly clueless. Utterly clueless. It's all well having your good intentions and all your theories about, libertarian socialism, but how's that going to turn out in practice? Exactly. Like it's always turned out. Into complete terror. Into a complete mess. So anyway, folk, if you've got anything you would like to add in yourself, comment in the comment section below. Thank you for watching. I shall talk to you later. Cheers.